often catch myself lost in these quiet evenings, gazing up at the starry canopy, feeling the weight of questions that have haunted thinkers for millennia. What drives us to seek the first breath of the universe, that elusive moment when everything that exists emerged from what? From nothing? From something eternal? From a state so foreign to our experience that language itself becomes a prison, trapping profound truth in inadequate symbols? I think about this differently now than I did years ago. When I was younger, I imagined the beginning as a dramatic explosion, a cosmic fireworks show where space and time burst into existence from an infinitesimal point. The Big Bang, they called it, though the name itself misleads us, suggesting sound where there could be none, suggesting a location in space when space itself was being born. But the more I reflect, the more I realize that our intuitions, shaped by billions of years of evolution in a world of medium-sized objects moving at moderate speeds, might be entirely inadequate for grasping what preceded existence as we know it. When cosmologists speak of singularities, they describe mathematical boundaries where our equations break down, where density and temperature approach infinity, where the very notion of before loses meaning because time itself might not have existed. Yet doesn't this feel like an intellectual surrender? We push our understanding to the edge of a cliff and then throw up our hands, declaring that the territory beyond is unknowable. I find myself resisting this conclusion, not out of arrogance, but because the history of human thought is filled with boundaries that seemed absolute until someone found a way across. Consider Plato's cave, those prisoners who knew only shadows on a wall, convinced that flickering silhouettes represented the fullness of reality. When one escaped and saw the fire, the objects casting shadows, and eventually the sun itself, their entire framework for understanding existence had to be reconstructed. Are we not in our own cave when we think about cosmic origins? We observe the universe expanding, cooling, evolving according to laws we've painstakingly decoded. We trace this expansion backward in time, watching the cosmos compress, heat up, approach that mysterious boundary. But what if the singularity is merely a shadow on our mathematical wall, and the true shape of cosmic genesis lies beyond our current vision? Some physicists propose that the universe didn't begin at all, not in the way we typically imagine. Instead of a singular birth from nothing, perhaps there was a bounce, a previous cosmic cycle contracting down to an incredibly dense but finite state, then rebounding outward to create the expansion we observe. This idea resonates with something deeply human, doesn't it? The notion that death and birth are woven together, that endings and beginnings form a continuous fabric rather than absolute breaks. The phoenix rising from ashes, the seasons cycling endlessly, Nietzsche's eternal return. These mythic and philosophical frameworks suggest our minds are already primed to accept cosmic cyclicity. But thinking deeper about this bounce, I wonder what it means for reality itself. If the universe contracts and expands in an infinite rhythm, then what we call our universe is merely one chapter in an endless book. Every galaxy, every star, every conscious being that has ever wondered about existence would be just a temporary arrangement of matter and energy destined to collapse back into an unimaginably dense state before erupting outward again. Does this diminish us, or does it connect us to something eternal? I sometimes imagine time as a vast tapestry, woven on a loom we can barely perceive. Each thread represents a moment, a state of the cosmos, And what we experience as the flow of time is simply our consciousness tracing along these threads. The Big Bang singularity in this metaphor would be the edge of the tapestry. But what if there's no edge? What if the weaving continues infinitely in all directions and we're simply unable to see beyond a certain point because the pattern becomes too dense, too tightly woven for our instruments or theories to penetrate? This brings me to consider the vacuum itself, not as empty space, but as something far more strange and active. Quantum field theory reveals that what we call empty space is actually a seething ocean of virtual particles, constantly appearing and disappearing, borrowing energy from the universe for brief instants before paying it back. The vacuum is not nothing, it's a bubbling sea of potential existence. When I contemplate cosmic origins through this lens, the question shifts. Perhaps it's not, how did something come from nothing? But rather, how did stable, persistent existence crystallize out of the quantum foam that may have always been there? I find myself drawn to the image of reality as having always existed in some form, not the specific form of galaxies and atoms, but as a substrate of possibility. The universe we inhabit, with its particular laws and constants, might have emerged from this substrate the way ice crystals form from supercooled water, a phase transition, a symmetry breaking, where one possibility became actual among infinite potential configurations. But reflecting on this, I encounter a troubling question. Why this configuration? Why these laws of physics, these particular constants that allow stars to form, planets to coalesce, life to emerge, consciousness to ponder its own existence? The values seem extraordinarily fine-tuned. Change the strength of gravity by a tiny fraction, and stars either burn out instantly or never ignite. Adjust the mass difference between protons and neutrons by a hair, and stable atoms become impossible. The universe appears calibrated for complexity, for life, for observers like us. This is where the anthropic principle enters, and I confess, it both satisfies and disturbs me. One version says simply, we observe these particular conditions because only in such conditions could observers exist. It's a tautology, true by definition. If the universe were different, we wouldn't be here to notice. But does this explain anything? Or does it merely reframe the mystery? I think it's like saying, I'm surprised I won the lottery. And someone responding, of course you won. If you hadn't, you wouldn't be surprised. The response is logically valid, but emotionally unsatisfying. Yet there's a deeper version that intrigues me more. If our universe is not alone, if reality consists of countless cosmic bubbles, each with different physical laws, then the fine-tuning becomes statistically expected. Somewhere in this vast multiverse landscape, conditions perfect for life must exist, and we necessarily find ourselves in one of those rare pockets. We're not special. We're inevitable, given enough cosmic real estate. This multiverse concept emerges from several theoretical frameworks. Eternal inflation suggests that quantum fluctuations in an inflating field cause some regions to stop inflating and become observable universes like ours, while other regions continue inflating forever, spawning endless new bubble universes. Each bubble might have different properties, different physical constants. We inhabit one bubble among infinitely many, selected not by design but by the anthropic filter. We must be in a life-permitting bubble because that's the only kind where creatures like us can exist to wonder about these questions. The image that helps me grasp this is a cosmic ocean where waves are constantly forming. Some waves are small, others enormous. Some crash immediately, others persist. Our observable universe is just one wave in an infinite sea, and the sea itself may have no beginning or end. It simply exists, generating waves eternally. The question of cosmic origins then transforms. Instead of asking, when did the ocean appear? We ask, how do waves form? And why does our wave have the particular properties we observe? But I pause here because this perspective carries profound implications. If we're merely one bubble among infinitely many, does that diminish the significance of our existence? When I watch the sunset paint the sky in colors that move me to tears, when I witness an act of compassion between strangers, when I contemplate the extraordinary fact that the universe has evolved structures capable of understanding themselves, does all this become less meaningful if it's repeated in countless variations across the multiverse? I don't think so, but I struggle with this. Meaning isn't derived from uniqueness alone. A beautiful song doesn't become less beautiful because other beautiful songs exist. Love between two people isn't diminished by the existence of other loving relationships. Perhaps the same applies cosmically. Our universe, our existence, our consciousness, these remain profound regardless of how many other universes or existences there might be. The fact that you and I can contemplate these mysteries, can feel wonder and awe, can build theories and test them against observation, this is remarkable whether we're alone or part of an infinite ensemble. Still, the question nags at me in these quiet moments. What is it all for? Not just why this universe with these laws, but why existence rather than non-existence? Why is there something rather than nothing? This might be the deepest question we can ask, and I suspect it lies at the boundary between physics and metaphysics, between science and philosophy. Some would say it's a meaningless question, that nothing isn't actually a coherent concept. How can we imagine nothing without imagining empty space, which is already something? Our minds can't grasp absolute non-being because we exist within being. Perhaps this is the ultimate limit, not a limit of our instruments or mathematics, but a limit built into consciousness itself. We are the universe observing itself. But that very fact might prevent us from stepping fully outside existence to understand why existence is. It's like an eye trying to see itself directly, or a program trying to observe its own source code while running. There may be fundamental boundaries to self-reference, yet I find beauty in the striving itself. As I continue exploring these ideas in the parts ahead, I'm reminded that the journey matters as much as any destination. The fact that we can ask these questions, that we're compelled to seek understanding even when answers seem perpetually beyond reach. This itself tells us something profound about the cosmos. It suggests that reality is not just physical stuff obeying laws, but includes this strange property of generating beings who wonder, who question, who refuse to accept mystery without investigation. Continuing from where we left our ponderings, I want to turn attention briefly to something closer to home, yet equally mysterious, the solar corona and its winds. Why do I mention this when we've been contemplating cosmic origins? Because I think there's a beautiful parallel here, a fractal quality where questions about the universe's first breath mirror questions about the ongoing breath of our own star. The sun's corona, that ethereal halo visible during eclipses, burns at temperatures exceeding 1,000,000 degrees, while the surface beneath it sits at a mere 6,000 degrees. This defies our everyday intuition, doesn't it? Heat should flow from hot to cold, dissipate outward. Yet somehow the corona maintains these extraordinary temperatures, flinging streams of charged particles, protons, electrons, alpha particles, into space at hundreds of kilometers per second. This plasma rushes outward, overcoming the sun's gravity, filling the solar system with an invisible wind that shapes magnetic fields, creates auroras on Earth, and carries the sun's influence far beyond the planets. But why? What mechanism pumps energy into the corona, sustaining these million-degree temperatures when thermodynamics suggests it should cool? Scientists have wrestled with this coronal heating problem for decades. They've proposed magnetic reconnection, where twisted field lines snap and release energy like breaking rubber bands, and wave dissipation, where ripples in magnetic fields transfer momentum and heat to particles. The sun's magnetic field, tangled by convective churning below the surface, creates a dynamic architecture of loops and funnels through which plasma flows. Perhaps the heating occurs not in the corona itself, but lower down in the chromosphere, with hot plasma then rising upward along magnetic channels to fill the corona. I find myself fascinated by this because it reminds me that even nearby, even in our own cosmic backyard, profound mysteries persist. We can observe the sun in exquisite detail, measure its emissions across wavelengths, send probes to fly through its corona, and still we're piecing together exactly how this stellar breath emerges. If such questions remain open for a star we can study intimately, how much more mysterious must be the universe's origins, hidden behind horizons of time and distance? But there's something deeper that strikes me about the solar wind. It represents a continuous process of becoming. The sun isn't a static object, but an active, dynamic entity constantly transforming itself and its surroundings. Mass flows outward, energy radiates away, yet the sun persists, sustained by fusion at its core. In a sense, the sun is always giving birth to the solar wind, moment by moment, an ongoing creation rather than a singular event. Could this be a useful way to think about cosmic origins too? When we ask about the beginning of the universe, we often frame it as a singular moment. The Big Bang, time zero, the initial singularity. But perhaps reality is more like the sun, always in process, always becoming. Maybe what we call the Big Bang wasn't a beginning, but a transition, one phase of existence flowing into another, like plasma flowing from chromosphere to corona and outward as wind. The question then becomes not what caused the first moment, but rather, what is the nature of the eternal process within which our observable universe is one episode? This brings me back to cyclical models, those visions of cosmic bounce where contraction gives way to expansion in an endless rhythm. I think about these models differently now, not as exact repetitions, the universe collapsing and re-expanding in identical cycles, but as something more fluid, more organic. Each cycle might carry information forward, some subtle imprint of what came before, the way ocean waves carry patterns from previous waves, or the way ecosystems rebuild after catastrophe, but never quite replicate their previous state exactly. There's a philosophical tradition, ancient and recurring, that reality operates in cycles. The Stoics spoke of eternal return, where the cosmos periodically undergoes conflagration and renewal. Hindu cosmology envisions vast cycles of creation and dissolution lasting billions of years. Nietzsche reimagined this idea without religious trappings, suggesting that in infinite time with finite states, everything must recur eternally. But I'm drawn to a subtly different vision, not exact recurrence, but thematic recurrence, patterns that repeat in endless variations. Imagine reality as an improvisational musician, playing riffs on themes that have appeared countless times before, but never quite the same way twice. Each universe cycle explores different possibilities, different physical constants, different arrangements of matter and energy. Some cycles might be brief and sterile, others long and rich with complexity. we find ourselves in a cycle capable of supporting observers, because only such cycles produce creatures capable of wondering about their origins. The anthropic principle again, but now embedded in a temporal framework rather than just a spatial multiverse. Yet I struggle with something about cyclical models. If the universe bounces, what happens to information? In our expanding universe, entropy increases, disorder grows, patterns decay, useful energy becomes dispersed and unavailable. This is the arrow of time, the directionality we experience viscerally. Coffee cools, ice melts, organisms age and die, stars exhaust their fuel. If the universe collapses back down, does entropy reverse? Do broken eggs reassemble? Do scattered photons converge back into coherent beams? Most physicists would say no. Even in collapse, entropy likely continues increasing. The bounce, if it occurs, would represent a moment of maximal entropy rather than a reset to low entropy. But then how does the next cycle begin with the low entropy needed for structure to form? This is sometimes called the entropy problem for cyclic cosmologies, and it nags at me. Perhaps information is lost in the bounce, reality gets shuffled like a deck of cards, and each new cycle starts fresh with low entropy, not because of reversal, but because of some mechanism we don't yet understand, something that operates at the quantum level where classical notions of entropy might not apply. Or perhaps, and this is more speculative, information doesn't live solely in the material contents of the universe, but in some deeper substrate. String theorists speak of a bulk, a higher dimensional space in which our four-dimensional universe is embedded like a membrane floating in a vaster ocean. If this picture has any truth, maybe information can be stored in the bulk, even when the membrane undergoes radical transformations. The bounce would be a local event from the perspective of the bulk, and continuity would be maintained at a level beyond our direct observation. This idea of brains, short for membranes, emerged from string theories attempt to unify quantum mechanics and gravity. In this framework, what we call particles are actually tiny vibrating strings, and what we call space-time might be a higher dimensional construct where different dimensions can be curled up small or extended large. Our entire observable universe could be a three-dimensional brain moving through a higher dimensional bulk. Other brains might exist parallel to ours, and collisions between brains could explain what we observe as the Big Bang. I confess this picture both excites and troubles me. It's elegant mathematically, offering potential explanations for deep puzzles like why gravity is so much weaker than other forces, perhaps because it can leak into extra dimensions while other forces are confined to our brain. It connects to cyclical models naturally. Brains could collide periodically, creating explosive events that look like beginnings from within, but are merely interactions within a larger, eternal structure. Our universe's apparent fine-tuning might reflect selection effects across many brains with different properties. But how do we test this? String theory has struggled with experimental verification for decades. The energy scales where its predictions diverge from standard physics are often far beyond what we can reach in laboratories. We can't directly detect extra dimensions if they're curled up smaller than atomic nuclei. We can't observe the bulk from within the brain. Does this mean brain cosmology is more philosophy than physics, or is it a legitimate scientific hypothesis that simply requires patience and ingenuity to test? I tend to think the boundary between physics and philosophy is more permeable than we often acknowledge. Physics didn't spring fully formed from pure empiricism. It emerged from natural philosophy, from asking questions like what is the nature of reality and how do things change? The scientific method, hypothesis, prediction, experiment, is extraordinarily powerful for refining answers and eliminating wrong ideas. But the questions themselves often arise from philosophical reflection and mathematical beauty. When I consider brain cosmology or cyclical models or eternal inflation, I'm struck by how they change the framing of cosmic origins. Instead of a universe that begins from nothing, we get scenarios where what we call the universe is a local manifestation within something vaster and possibly eternal. The desperate question, why is there something rather than nothing, gets partially dissolved because there always was something at some level. Perhaps not the something of atoms and galaxies, but a quantum substrate, a bulk, a field undergoing eternal inflation, some fundamental layer of reality that doesn't require its own beginning. This shift feels profound to me. It's the difference between asking what caused the first cause and asking what is the nature of the eternal ground within which causes occur. The first question leads to infinite regress or arbitrary stopping points. The second accepts eternity as fundamental and asks about its structure and properties. It's not that this dissolves all mystery, far from it, but it relocates the mystery from temporal origins to the nature of being itself. And yet I can't fully escape the nagging question. Even if reality is eternal at some level, even if our universe is just one bubble or cycle or brain collision among many, why does any of it exist? Why this eternal substrate rather than absolute nothingness? Perhaps this is where physics must give way to metaphysics, where empirical investigation reaches its limit because we're embedded within existence and can't step outside to examine it from nowhere. Or perhaps, and this is where my thinking becomes most speculative, existence is the default state and non-existence is incoherent. Maybe nothing isn't actually a possibility, not even in principle. When we try to imagine nothing, we imagine empty space, but space is something. We imagine absence, but absence presupposes a framework within which absence can be defined. Total non-being might be not just empirically unobservable, but logically impossible. If this is true, then the question, why something rather than nothing, is a category error, like asking, what happens north of the North Pole? The question appears meaningful grammatically, but fails semantically. I find both comfort and unease in this possibility. Comfort because it eliminates the need for a first cause, an unmoved mover, a creation ex nihilo. Reality simply is, has always been, will always be, in some form or another. The specific form changes, perhaps through cosmic cycles, perhaps through bubble universes, perhaps in ways we haven't conceived, but existence itself is necessary and eternal. The unease comes from recognizing that this doesn't really explain existence. It just declares it brute fact. And is that satisfying? I return to the image of the solar wind, that constant outflowing from our star. Each particle of plasma that streams past Earth had a beginning. It was once part of the sun's core, forged through fusion, cycled upward through convection, heated in the corona, and accelerated outward. But the process that created it had no beginning. It's been happening for billions of years and will continue for billions more. The specific particles are temporary. The process is enduring. Maybe reality is like this at the largest scale. The specific contents of our universe, these galaxies, these stars, these atoms, this moment, are temporary manifestations. But the underlying process, whatever it is, has no beginning and no end. We're not asking about the start of the process, but about our particular place within it, our local eddy In an infinite stream, continuing deeper into these reflections, I want to explore what might be the strangest and most vertigo inducing possibility that our universe is merely one bubble in an infinite foam of universes, each with its own properties, its own laws, perhaps even its own dimensionality and logic. This vision emerges from eternal inflation, a scenario where the process that drove our universe's early exponential expansion never fully stops but continues forever in some regions, occasionally spawning pocket universes like ours. The basic idea grips my imagination. Imagine a scalar field, call it the inflaton field, permeating reality. In most regions, this field sits in a high energy state, causing space to expand exponentially fast. But quantum fluctuations constantly disturb the field, and occasionally, in some small patch, the field drops to a lower energy state. That patch stops inflating and becomes what we'd recognize as an observable universe, complete with matter, radiation, and the capacity for structure formation. Meanwhile, the surrounding regions continue inflating, and within those inflating regions, more quantum fluctuations create more pocket universes, on and on, forever. What strikes me most forcefully about this picture is its implication for meaning and uniqueness. If eternal inflation is correct, then not only are there countless other universes, but there are infinitely many of them, and the process of creating them never ends. Every possible configuration that's compatible with the underlying physics, every possible arrangement of particles, every possible history will be realized somewhere, somewhen, in this infinite ensemble. There will be universes almost identical to ours, differing only in minute details. There will be universes radically different, where different forces dominate or where the dimensionality of space is different. Does this trouble you? It troubles me sometimes, though I'm not sure it should. On one hand, it seems to strip away any specialness from our existence. We're not the universe, just a universe, one random bubble among infinitely many, distinguished only by the fact that we happen to be here to observe it. The story of cosmic evolution that feels so meaningful, from plasma to atoms to stars to planets to life to consciousness, is repeated endlessly across the multiverse landscape with infinite variations. Our triumphs and tragedies, our art and philosophy, our love and loss, all of it replayed and remixed in countless permutations. But on the other hand, I think this might be liberating rather than diminishing. Consider, if every possibility is realized somewhere, then the particular possibility that includes you and me, this conversation, this moment of reflection, this too is part of the infinite richness of existence. We're not less meaningful because we're not unique. We're meaningful because we exist, because we experience, because we wonder. The sunset I mentioned earlier doesn't become less beautiful because other sunsets occur in other universes. Beauty isn't a zero-sum game where more instances dilute the value of each instance. I find myself thinking about this in relation to human relationships and experiences. When two people fall in love, the meaning of their connection doesn't depend on whether other people have fallen in love. The birth of a child isn't less miraculous because billions of children have been born. Each instance carries its own intrinsic significance, its own subjective reality that can't be reduced or diminished by comparison to other instances. Perhaps the same applies cosmically. Our universe, our existence, matters absolutely within our frame of reference, even if it's one thread in an infinite tapestry. Still, the multiverse raises philosophical puzzles that make my head spin. If every possibility is realized, what does probability mean? When we calculate that some event has a 1 in a million chance of occurring, we mean that in a large ensemble of trials, it happens about once per million attempts. But in an infinite multiverse, every event with non-zero probability happens infinitely many times. The rare becomes commonplace. The improbable becomes inevitable. Does this make our probabilistic reasoning meaningless, or does it just require recalibration? Physicists have grappled with this through something called the measure problem. When dealing with infinities, you need to define how to count things, how to assign relative probabilities to different outcomes. Should we count by volume in the multiverse? By number of observers? By some other metric? Different choices lead to different predictions, and there's no obviously correct answer. This might seem like an abstract mathematical puzzle, but it has real implications for how we interpret observations and make predictions. For instance, if we try to explain the fine-tuning of physical constants anthropically by saying we observe life-friendly values because only such values allow observers, we need to know how common such values are across the multiverse. Are we typical observers, or are we fantastically unlikely outliers? Without a proper measure, we can't say, and the anthropic explanation loses its predictive power. This concerns me because it suggests eternal inflation, despite its mathematical elegance and explanatory breadth, might not be as scientifically constrained as we'd like. Can a theory that predicts everything really explain anything? Yet I'm drawn back to the sheer audacity of the vision. Reality is an infinite sea of possibilities, all actualized, all existing simultaneously, in some sense. Time itself becomes strange in this picture. Eternal inflation happens in what physicists call the future, meaning the inflating regions persist into the indefinite future, spawning new bubble universes without end. But within each bubble, there's a local beginning, a moment when that particular universe came into existence. Time fragments into countless local timelines, each with its own arrow, its own story. This connects to something that has puzzled thinkers for centuries, the nature of time itself. We experience time as flowing, carrying us from past through present into future. We remember the past but not the future. Causes precede effects. Entropy increases. Yet the fundamental laws of physics, at least at the microscopic level, are largely time symmetric. The equations work just as well running forward or backward. So where does the arrow of time come from? The standard answer involves entropy and the second law of thermodynamics. Our universe began in an extraordinarily low entropy state, highly ordered, far from equilibrium, and has been sliding toward disorder ever since. The arrow of time points in the direction of entropy increase. We remember the past because memory formation involves entropy increase. We don't remember the future because that would require decreasing entropy. The flow of time isn't something external to the universe, but is rather a feature of how the universe evolves from low entropy to high entropy. But this answer just pushes the mystery back a step. Why did the universe begin in such a low entropy state? In eternal inflation, each bubble universe begins with low entropy, not by cosmic coincidence, but because the transition from inflating space to normal space naturally produces low entropy initial conditions. The process of bubble formation itself sets up the arrow of time for that bubble. So in a sense, eternal inflation explains not just why the universe exists, but why it has the temporal structure we observe, why there's a directionality to time, why we remember yesterday but not tomorrow. I find this deeply satisfying. Yet it opens new questions. If each bubble universe has its own arrow of time, could there be regions of the multiverse where time flows differently? Could there be universes where entropy decreases, where effects precede causes, where memory works in reverse? Our intuition rebels against this. Such universes seem incoherent, logically impossible. But maybe that's just our parochialism, our inability to imagine consciousness or causation outside the framework we've always known. Or perhaps there are deep logical constraints that apply across all possible universes, even within an infinite multiverse. Maybe certain features, like the causal structure where effects follow causes, or the logical principle of non-contradiction, are necessary features of any reality that contains observers. If so, then the multiverse, despite its infinity and diversity, would have limits. Not all mathematical possibilities would be physically realized, only those compatible with certain bedrock principles. This brings me to consider a truly unsettling idea that's gained some traction in recent years: the simulation hypothesis. What if our universe, rather than being a fundamental physical reality or a bubble in an eternal inflation landscape, is actually a computational simulation running in some higher level reality? What if everything we observe, matter, energy, space, time, is essentially information being processed like pixels on a screen or bits in a computer? At first, this sounds like science fiction, but the argument has a certain logic. If it's possible for a civilization to create simulated realities, and we're already doing this in primitive ways with video games and virtual environments, then a sufficiently advanced civilization could create simulations detailed enough to include conscious entities. Those simulated beings would perceive their simulated world as real. Now, if civilizations typically go through a phase where they create many such simulations, then the number of simulated realities vastly exceeds the number of base realities. Statistically, any given observer should assume they're more likely to be in a simulation than in base reality. I find this argument simultaneously compelling and frustrating. Compelling because it's logically coherent and makes a kind of probabilistic sense. Frustrating because it seems unfalsifiable. What evidence could we possibly find that would definitively prove we're not in a simulation? Any apparent glitch or inconsistency could be part of the simulation's design. Any physical law we discover is just a feature of how the simulation operates. We're trapped inside the system, unable to peer outside. Yet thinking about simulations shifts my perspective on cosmic origins once again. If we're simulated, then the Big Bang wasn't a physical event but a starting condition in a program. The fine-tuning of constants wasn't cosmic luck or anthropic selection, but deliberate parameter choices by the simulators. The question, why is there something rather than nothing, becomes, why did the simulators choose to run this simulation? And that question has answers of a very different kind: purposes, intentions, designs, rather than mechanical causes or random quantum fluctuations. But of course, this just displaces the mystery. We'd still want to know about the reality where the simulators exist. What is the nature of their universe? Did it have a beginning? Is it simulated in turn? We risk infinite regress, simulations within simulations, turtles all the way down, or we eventually reach a base reality, and then all our original questions resurface about that base reality. I'm not sure the simulation hypothesis actually helps with the deep metaphysical questions, but I think it's valuable for revealing our assumptions. We tend to assume that the reality we observe is fundamental that physics describes the deepest layer of existence, but maybe physics only describes the layer we have access to, and there are deeper layers, whether those are the bulk of string theory, the eternal inflation field, a computational substrate, or something we haven't imagined yet. What strikes me across all these frameworks, cyclical bounces, brain collisions, eternal inflation, multiverse, simulation, is that they all attempt to embed our universe within something larger, to show that what appears to be an absolute beginning is actually a transition or emergence within a pre-existing structure. The impulse behind this is understandable. We struggle with true creation ex nihilo because it seems to violate everything we know about causation. So we construct theories where the apparent beginning is recontextualized. But I wonder if we're avoiding the real mystery rather than solving it. Even if we successfully show that our universe emerged from eternal inflation, or from a previous cycle, or from a brain collision, or from a simulation, we haven't explained why the framework itself exists. Why is there an inflatant field capable of eternal inflation? Why is there a higher dimensional bulk in which brains can exist? Why is there a computational substrate capable of running simulations? Why is there a universe capable of having cycles? Maybe at some point we have to accept brute existence, the fact that something exists because existence is simply the way things are without further explanation. This feels intellectually unsatisfying, yet perhaps it's unavoidable. Every chain of explanation must either go on forever, circle back on itself, or terminate in something accepted without explanation. Those are the only logical possibilities: infinite regress, circularity, or foundation. And of the three, accepting a foundational reality that simply exists, whether we call it quantum fields, space-time, mathematical structure, or consciousness, seems least problematic. Continuing from these thoughts about foundations and brute existence, I want to turn towards something that weighs on me more personally: the question of what it means for us as conscious observers to exist in any of these cosmological scenarios. Whether we inhabit a cyclical universe, a bubble in eternal inflation, a brain floating in higher dimensions, or even a simulation, what ethical implications follow? What responsibilities, if any, do we bear as parts of the cosmos that have become capable of understanding the cosmos? This might seem like an odd direction to take after discussing physics and cosmology, but I think it's essential. Science can describe how things are and predict how they'll unfold, but it remains silent on questions of meaning and value. When we discover that we're tiny, temporary structures on an unremarkable planet orbiting an average star in one galaxy among hundreds of billions, or worse, in one universe among infinite universes, what does this do to our sense of significance? How should we live in light of cosmic perspective? The traditional religious answer was that humans occupy a special place in creation, that we're made in the image of the divine, that our existence serves a cosmic purpose. This framework provided meaning even in the face of personal suffering or historical tragedy. Everything happened within a grand narrative where justice would ultimately prevail, where meaning was guaranteed. But as our scientific understanding expanded, this comforting narrative eroded. We're not at the center of anything. We're accidents of chemistry and evolution, temporary patterns that will eventually dissolve. Does recognizing this cosmic reality drain life of meaning? I think many people fear it does. The existentialists confronted this head-on, acknowledging what Nietzsche called the death of God, the collapse of transcendent meaning, and asking whether humans could create their own meaning in an indifferent universe. Camus imagined Sisyphus, condemned to roll a boulder uphill forever, yet finding happiness in the act itself, rebelling against absurdity through persistent engagement. Sartre declared that existence precedes essence, that we're radically free to define ourselves because there's no pre-given purpose inscribed in the cosmos. These responses resonate with me, but I think they can be deepened by explicitly engaging with modern cosmology. When I contemplate eternal inflation in the multiverse, I don't feel diminished. I feel connected to something vast and wondrous. Yes, our particular universe is one among infinitely many, but that infinite diversity is staggering in its richness. Every possible story that can be told is being told somewhere. Every possible experience that can be had is being had by someone. We're not isolated accidents, but participants in an exhaustive exploration of possibility space. Moreover, our ability to understand this, to grasp that we're in a multiverse, to comprehend inflation and quantum mechanics and relativity, is itself remarkable. The universe has evolved structures capable of reflecting on their own origins and nature. Consciousness, whatever its ultimate metaphysical status, represents reality becoming self-aware. When I think deeply about physics, when I feel awe at the elegance of natural laws or the vastness of cosmic scales, that experience is the universe experiencing itself. We're not separate from the cosmos looking in. We're the cosmos looking at itself from the inside. This perspective shifts the ethical question. If we're expressions of cosmic possibility, temporary crystallizations of matter and energy into self-aware form, then perhaps our responsibility is to honor that improbability by living fully, by creating beauty and meaning, by expanding understanding. Not because some external authority demands it, but because doing so aligns with what we are, the universe's way of knowing itself. But I struggle with this in the context of infinite multiverses. If every possibility is realized somewhere, does my choice to act ethically or unethically really matter? In some universe, I make the right choice. In another, I make the wrong one. The multiverse as a whole contains all possibilities. So nothing I do changes the total picture. This seems to undercut moral responsibility. Why should I strive to reduce suffering or create beauty in this universe if all possible configurations exist anyway? I think the answer lies in recognizing that ethics operates at the local, experiential level, not at the global, objective level. The suffering of a person in front of me is real from their subjective perspective and from mine, regardless of whether other versions exist in other universes. My actions in this universe affect the actual experiences of actual beings here. The fact that other outcomes occur elsewhere doesn't make this outcome less real or less morally significant. It's similar to how the finite span of human life doesn't render individual lives meaningless. Yes, we'll die, and eventually everyone we've known will die, and eventually all traces of our civilization will vanish. But that future erasure doesn't retroactively negate the experiences we have now. Love is meaningful while it's felt. Joy is valuable while it's experienced. Suffering is bad while it's endured. The temporariness doesn't cancel the reality. Extending this reasoning to the multiverse, the fact that all possibilities exist somewhere doesn't mean my choices here are arbitrary. I exist in this branch of reality with these particular beings, in this particular context. My choices shape the character of this slice of existence. I can make this universe, this experiential stream, more filled with compassion, understanding, and flourishing, or I can contribute to suffering and degradation. The multiverse containing all possibilities doesn't erase the distinction between better and worse within any given branch. But there's a deeper ethical question that haunts me regarding eternal inflation specifically. If the process of creating bubble universes never ends, then an infinite number of conscious beings will come into existence, experiencing all possible configurations of joy and suffering. Some bubbles will be paradise worlds, others will be hells, and we can't affect any of that. It's all determined by the random quantum fluctuations in the inflaton field and the laws that govern each bubble's physics. This strikes me as ethically troubling in a different way than classical theodicy. Religious theodicy asks why a good God would allow suffering. We can propose answers involving free will, soul building, or incomprehensible divine purposes. But eternal inflation is impersonal. There's no intention, no purpose, just mindless physics churning out universe after universe, some filled with agony, some with bliss, most with mixtures of both. The process is indifferent, and it will continue forever, generating infinite quantities of suffering alongside infinite quantities of joy. How should we feel about this? On one hand, we might say it's not an ethical problem because there's no agent to blame, no alternative that could have been chosen. The multiverse simply is what it is. On the other hand, if we discovered that we could affect the properties of future bubble universes, perhaps by manipulating the inflaton field or the laws that determine bubble characteristics, wouldn't we have an obligation to try to tilt the distribution toward less suffering and more flourishing? This is wildly speculative, of course. We have no idea how to manipulate inflation or affect other universes. But the thought experiment reveals something about moral intuition. We seem to care about suffering even when it's not directly connected to us, even when it's hypothetical or distant. The scope of moral concern naturally expands as our understanding expands. Once we grasped that people on other continents were real and similar to us, ethical frameworks expanded to include them. Once we recognized that animals suffer, many extended moral consideration to them. If we come to truly believe in the multiverse with its infinite conscious beings, does our circle of ethical concern need to expand again? I'm not sure what practical implications this would have. We're embedded in our particular bubble universe with limited causal reach. Perhaps the most we can do is optimize our local region, make this universe, or at least our corner of it, as good as possible. That's a massive enough task. Humanity faces existential risks from climate change, nuclear weapons, engineered pathogens, misaligned artificial intelligence. We have abundant suffering to address right here: poverty, disease, oppression, violence. Maybe worrying about other universes is a distraction from urgent local responsibilities. Yet I can't shake the feeling that the cosmological perspective matters for how we approach even local problems. When we recognize that we're not the center of creation, that we're not uniquely privileged, that our existence is contingent and temporary, it can foster humility. Humility about our knowledge. Maybe our scientific theories are wrong or incomplete. Humility about our importance. The cosmos doesn't revolve around human concerns. Humility about our perspective. Others might see reality very differently, and we should hold our beliefs provisionally. This humility seems ethically valuable. It counteracts the tribalism, dogmatism, and narcissism that cause so much harm. If I truly internalize that I'm one conscious being among potentially infinite conscious beings, that my culture is one among countless cultures across the multiverse, that my understanding is limited and fallible, then I'm more likely to approach others with openness rather than certainty, with curiosity rather than judgment, with cooperation rather than domination. At the same time, cosmic perspective can also foster a sense of solidarity. We're all in this together, all temporary patterns, dancing briefly in the cosmic flow before dissolving back into entropy. Every human being, every conscious creature, is a rare and precious crystallization of matter into awareness. We should cherish and protect these instances of consciousness, expand the circle of flourishing as widely as we can. There's also something to be said for the sheer audacity of consciousness arising to contemplate these questions. Whether we emerged through blind natural selection on this planet, or whether we're part of a simulation designed by advanced beings, or whether we're expressions of eternal mathematical structure, the fact remains that we can think about infinity, can grasp quantum mechanics, can construct theories of cosmic origins that would have seemed like pure fantasy just centuries ago. This cognitive capacity is extraordinary, and perhaps part of our ethical responsibility is to develop and use it well. I think about future generations who might understand cosmology far better than we do now. Perhaps they'll be able to test string theory or observe signatures of the multiverse. Perhaps they'll develop quantum technologies that let them probe the Planck scale where space-time itself becomes grainy. Perhaps they'll even make contact with intelligence from other civilizations or create artificial consciousness that thinks in ways alien to biological minds. What we do now shapes what's possible for them. Do we leave them a thriving world with functioning ecosystems and stable climate, or a depleted wasteland? Do we preserve knowledge and culture, or let it erode? Do we develop wisdom to accompany our growing technological power, or rush headlong into existential catastrophe? From the perspective of eternal inflation, humanity's entire existence, from our emergence in Africa to whatever future awaits us, is a brief flash in one tiny bubble universe. You might think this makes us insignificant, but I've come to see it differently. We're the part of this particular bubble that woke up, that became self-aware, that started asking why. That's not insignificant. That's the universe doing something extraordinary in this particular place and time. We're stardust that learned to wonder about stars. So where does all this leave me, standing under the night sky, feeling the weight of these ancient questions? After wandering through singularities and bounces, brains and bubbles, multiverses and simulations, have I come any closer to understanding why there is something rather than nothing? Have I grasped the first breath of the universe? I think the honest answer is no, not in the sense of final, complete understanding. But I've come to see that this isn't failure. It's the nature of the inquiry itself. The deepest questions don't resolve into neat answers. They open into further depths, revealing layers upon layers of mystery. And perhaps that's exactly as it should be. What I have gained is perspective. I see now that our universe, whether it began from a singularity or bounced from a previous cycle or bubbled out of eternal inflation, is far stranger and more wondrous than our ancestors could have imagined. The cosmos isn't a static stage where events play out. It's dynamic, evolutionary, creative. Space itself expands. Time had a beginning, or perhaps flows in cycles, or fragments into countless local arrows. Matter and energy are interconvertible, and both emerge from quantum fields that seethe with virtual particles. The vacuum isn't empty, it's alive with possibility, and we, fragile, finite, conscious beings, have figured much of this out. Through mathematics and observation, through careful reasoning and bold speculation, we've traced our origins back to the first seconds of cosmic time. We've discovered laws that govern everything from subatomic particles to galactic clusters. We've even begun to probe beyond the observable universe using logic and theoretical frameworks to explore what might lie outside our cosmic horizon. This represents an extraordinary achievement, a triumph of the human mind and spirit. Yet humility is equally warranted. Our best theories remain incomplete. We don't know how to unify quantum mechanics with general relativity. We don't understand what dark matter and dark energy are, though they comprise most of the universe. We can't test string theory or definitively prove the multiverse exists. And underlying everything, the question persists. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why does reality have the structure it has? Could it have been otherwise? I've come to suspect that some questions may not have answers in the conventional sense, not because we're too limited to find them, but because the questions themselves rest on assumptions that don't apply at the deepest levels. Asking what came before the Big Bang assumes time extends infinitely into the past, but if time itself began with the Big Bang, before becomes meaningless. Asking why something exists rather than nothing assumes non-existence is a coherent possibility. But perhaps it isn't. Our language and concepts evolved to navigate the middle-scale world of our evolutionary environment. They may simply be inadequate for grasping ultimate reality. Still, the seeking matters. Even if we never reach final answers, the journey of inquiry expands us. It connects us to something larger than our individual lives, larger even than our species or planet. When I contemplate cosmic origins, I'm participating in a conversation that stretches across cultures and centuries, a collective human effort to make sense of existence. Every generation adds to this understanding, refines the questions, discovers new angles of approach. And there's something sacred in this, though I use that word carefully. Not sacred in the sense of religious dogma or supernatural revelation, but sacred in the sense of profound, worthy of reverence, touching on the deepest aspects of what it means to be. The universe gave rise to beings who can ask why, who can feel wonder, who can trace back through billions of years of cosmic evolution to glimpse their own origins. That recursive loop, the cosmos comprehending itself, strikes me as precious beyond measure. So perhaps the conclusion I've reached is this: we live in mystery, but it's not a mystery that should paralyze or discourage us. It's a mystery that invites exploration, that rewards curiosity, that opens endlessly into deeper understanding, even while final certainty remains elusive. Whether we're temporary patterns in an eternal cosmic dance, or observers in one bubble among infinite universes, or even characters in some vast simulation, we're here now, aware, capable of wonder and love and understanding. That's enough. That has to be enough. And maybe, just maybe, being enough is itself part of the answer. Not a propositional answer that satisfies the intellect, but an existential answer that satisfies the soul. We are the universe asking questions about itself. In that asking, in that wondering, meaning emerges not from outside, but from within the process itself. I look up at the stars, ancient light from distant suns, and I feel both infinitesimally small and cosmically connected. The atoms in my body were forged in stellar furnaces. The oxygen I breathe was exhaled by countless organisms over billions of years. The consciousness reflecting on these facts arose through an unbroken chain of causation stretching back to the universe's earliest moments. I am not separate from the cosmos. I am a way the cosmos exists. And so the question transforms one final time. Not why is there something rather than nothing, but what will we do with this extraordinary gift of existence? How will we honor the improbable fact that reality has evolved structures capable of understanding, creating, loving? What meaning will we make in our brief moment of awareness? These are the questions I carry forward from this inquiry. Not answers, but better questions. Not certainty, but deepened wonder. Not conclusion, but continuation. Because the cosmos is still unfolding, still creating, still becoming. And we're part of that becoming. For as long as our light shines, perhaps that's the deepest truth. We are the universe becoming conscious of itself, and in that consciousness lies both our responsibility and our greatest opportunity. To understand, to create, to care, to connect. This is what it means to be alive in a cosmos that, against all odds, has produced life. The night deepens around me, but I'm no longer troubled by the darkness. It's the darkness from which everything emerged, the fertile void pregnant with possibility. And standing here, asking these questions, feeling this wonder, I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. Home in mystery, at peace with not knowing, alive to the endless depths that remain to be explored.